Hi. Welcome, guys. Welcome, everyone. This is our seminars on cultivating and maintaining creativity in your bar program. My name is Phoebe Essman. I live in Asheville, North Carolina, and where I and my partner consult on beverage programs, run a curated cocktail catering business, and a vintage barware business. So lots of hands, all of them in the bar industry. I'm going to let everyone else introduce themselves. You want to start with Chelsea?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Chelsea Gregoire. My pronouns are they, them. I'm based here in Baltimore, Maryland. I am the owner and consultant behind Drinkable Genius, opening bar programs and restaurant programs for a number of owners. And I am now in the process, hopefully by the time you all see this, it will be open, opening my first concept as an owner called Church. So.
All right, Frank?
Kim?
Oh,
Frank?
Kim. Yep.
Frank, Kim?
I'd say ladies first.
Thank you. I'm Kimberly Patton Bragg, otherwise known as KPB. I'm the bar director at Palm and Pine here in New Orleans. I've been in the industry over 20 years, anywhere from Blue Smoke in New York, all the way doing 5 million things in New Orleans, and now at my happy home at Palm and Pine.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I'm Frank Mills. I am the owner and brewmaster of Daring Kombucha Cocktails, as well as a former beverage director for multiple establishments in my hometown, Washington, D.C. And with that, also a hiring partner within those establishments as well.
Busy people. So we're going to start by, I just want to, we all decided when we started talking about this that we should first acknowledge the elephant in the room. The elephant being the pandemic that we've all been functioning within, or trying to function within, for the last 2 years. Feels like longer. And what that can do to your creative process. I know that that the stresses of running bar programs and sort of feeling like your job is to be creative on demand can be taxing, can be exhausting to you. And when you're also, if you're in a management position, when you are sort of always aware of the numbers, also P&Ls, liquor orders, shrinkage, all the things, all of those things can feed into, you know, what, for lack of a better word, is creative constipation. And we sometimes fall back on, you know, our own style or our own sort of the ideas that we've developed that we, you know, sort of that identify us within maybe our beverage menus or maybe just within our communities. And I, for instance, you know, like I work closely with my partner, Christian, and if you read a menu, you can usually tell our drinks apart. You can tell a Phoebe drink from a Christian drink pretty easily. And one of the things that I want to talk about in this, we're going to start by talking about something that's kind of a stretch sometimes, I think, for people to wrap their heads around. But one of the things that I've done, that I've developed in order to continue a little bit of sort of thinking sideways or creativity within my own practice is the development of a personal taxonomy. And taxonomy is a scientific word. It's a science word. It's not a word that we generally apply to creative processes. But really, like, taxonomy means sort of, you know, an arrangement of method, you know, like, so it's a filing system, basically. And when I call something a personal taxonomy, what I'm referring to is sort of a collection of ideas and or songs or visual cues that you find instigate creative thoughts for yourself. And to me, it's good to have something that you can refer to when you get stuck, you know, like maybe you're at lineup and someone says, hey, we need to sell these 5 bottles of name your least favorite liqueur, and I need you to run a special. We open in 10 minutes. Sometimes it's easier. It's helpful to have some things that you've already thought of. I mean, I actually like have a taxonomy of ingredients in a way, in that I have a collection of things that I make throughout the year from seasonal products that I can then, if I need to, I can pull them out of the freezer or the reach-in or the walk-in because I've kind of like, well, this might work with this and maybe I can build something out of this. It's a little cushion. So I'm gonna hand it off to you guys, since this isn't just the Phoebe show, and see if any of you want to kind of chime in on the topic of taxonomy before we move on to Chelsea's topic.
Well, I think with a taxonomy, I think of it, of course, in artistic ways. It's like, also think of kind of like you as yourself, like Picasso. Picasso had a blue period, and, you know, 5 million different periods. And there are things that we've gone, it's like when you first start creating cocktails, you kind of got stuck in this box. Doesn't mean it's not relevant and you can't go back to that. But, you know, there was also this period that you can go back to, and that period when you have that 5 bottles, 10-minute special, it's a good way to go back and refer to. So definitely archiving your different periods, as it were, is a good reference to go back to.
I mean, we have a stack of notebooks, and actually I should let you know that this whole idea of a taxonomy started as because I got an assignment in graduate school. I went to grad school for art, and I had a teacher who gave us this was like a semester-long project that we did, which was develop a personal taxonomy. And the idea of it has just hung on. I graduated in 2008. So it's been sitting in the back of my head for a while. And as I was thinking about sort of how to plumb the depths of my own creativity due to difficulties in life and everything else, it reoccurred to me as something that might be useful to share with other folks. So Chelsea, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think of like the idea of a taxonomy, and I feel really fortunate that, you know, we got to share this topic together before, and I had some time to really process it and realize that I may not be calling it a taxonomy, but it's something that we have prepared. Like all of us that have to work in a creative way have explored this idea of organizing what makes us tick. And I think of this like the creative version of setting up your well the same every day. It's kind of like it's building these patterns in your brain. It's building these pathways and these triggers, not in a negative way, but in a positive way, right? Of like, what's going to spur creativity in me? What's going to bring me back to a time when I was really excited about what I was doing, or bring me back to a place where I was energized by what I was doing, because that's something that I think everyone is struggling with right now. And so this idea of a taxonomy, it can be as much work or as little work as you want it to be, right? And so I think it's just an interesting way to imagine lists. I'm a Virgo, so I love imagining any sort of list.
I'm a Pisces, but I'm also very much so engineered brained. And so therefore, meticulously and methodically, I work off of patterns. I work off of numerical orders. And so one of the first notions that I found that struck a chord with me when in the food and hospitality industry was mise en place. And everything being in its place, and then having kind of a roadmap from point A to point B, and having that set. So therefore there's a criteria, a pattern, as well as a destination for the guest experience, then led to kind of the trickle effect of then once I became in charge of, you know, utilizing what actual creativity I could pull out of my brain to create cocktails, to create beverage programs, to then have an establishment resonate off of that criteria within, once again, the guest experience. Those things are truly ways of just finding a definitive endpoint, because sometimes we don't always see the endpoint. We just know the detail to the beginning. And at that point, we have to find, from step A to step Z, how do we get to that point? How does it become uniquely our own idea, as well as then how does that process not just solely mimic something else, but then also allow your establishment or your program to then have something that, leans on a separation from other entities. And, I think that's where there are some times where leaning on things that you already know, like we build off of riffs at times, also going back down the woodworks of like, has there ever been an establishment that's just captivated you, or an individual behind the bar that has just made you watch every detail while you sat in front of them? Those are things that I go back to and I draw on, and then I build off of that for myself. And those are kind of my personal taxonomies. And I even have mentioned it in the past when we've done this, that a thesaurus is probably my go-to for like just the notion of how to build a taxonomy, because there are always so many ways you can say the same word, right? But redundancy becomes a thing once you get one thing in your mind. And that's when the creative juices start flowing. So just like a thesaurus shows you how to do that in so many different ways of a word, manipulating an ingredient or a spec, or incorporating molecular mixology into a situation, just so that you can change the whole build of something while still having somewhat the same meat and potatoes as the original. Those are kind of the roadmaps that I take, trying to discern some kind of change in each time I do this all over again.
And there's going to be a handout for everyone to download if you're more interested in sort of exploring the idea of taxonomy. And one of the suggestions that I've made in that is that, so, I mean, sometimes it can be hard to wrap your head around that. When I got this assignment, I was like, I don't even understand what you're saying, lady. Like, I don't get it. And it took me a while to get it. And it's like when you metabolize what mise en place means, all of a sudden, like you're mising out your whole life. And that's just the way it is from there on out, like everything in its place all the time, to make in as much as possible, unless you're moving, to make your life easier. But one of the things I wrote as an example is that if there's a technique that you are interested in exploring, or a cocktail family, say, or a single cocktail, like I love equal parts cocktails. I love them because it's so hard, because it's a great challenge to balance an equal parts cocktail. So like a bijou or a Negroni or whatever, or last word, whatever your favorite one is, like drill down on that cocktail. So yes, do a bunch of research on it, figure out its history, learn whatever you can about it, learn about the original ingredients and why they were there. And then sort of let your imagination have free play, like the greatest thing one of the greatest things about this job for me is the way that our imaginations are actually allowing us to make a living, which is not something that many people can say about their jobs.
It's true.
And it gets lost. And one of the reasons we wanted to do this is because like maintaining your creativity, finding ways to help maintain your creativity, your personal sort of mental is a kind of a mental health exercise. So taking a little time out of your day to spend thinking or working on something that maybe doesn't have an application immediately in your life really can improve the quality of your life. And I think that we could all use a little improvement in the quality of our lives. So I think I don't want to spend too much time on this. I want to get to everyone. So Chelsea, would you like to start to talk about your topic?
Yeah. I mean, you ended it on the perfect note, because when I started, so a little bit about what makes me tick and what gets me excited as a Virgo bar consultant is about like structures, like how we design structures and ways to support what the end goal, right? And so, for me, this idea of creativity is often the thing that people think of last, right? They're like, okay, how do I order the booze? How do I store the booze? How do I pour the booze, right? But you don't stop to think about like, how do I just keep my imagination alive? And until you need it, right? And then of course it's like grasping at straws, trying to spur creativity, right? So kind of the idea of just what you were talking about, Phoebe, of this idea that practicing creativity is a form of self-care. Human beings are curious by nature, and these past few years have been absolutely, and I am not a therapist, I take this with a grain of salt, but it has been traumatic. It has been a traumatizing experience for the industry as a whole, on us as individuals. And so when we are experiencing things like trauma, our first instinct is to shut down mental exercises that we're doing and streamline, so that, those things that allow our mind to wander, instead we've kind of closed it into a box, right? As a means of self-preservation. So the first thing to go is your creativity and your passion. And I think everybody feels a little bit of that. And so with that in mind, if you're creating a bar program, if you're, coming up with these menus, the likelihood that you also have bartenders and barbacks and servers also working with you or working for you, experiencing the same things you're experiencing, also trying to rediscover their creativity is high. It's a high likelihood. So I kind of wanted to talk about embedding spirits into your program. Spirits as in not actual spirits, but rather attitudes, right? So I've kind of put together some questions, and I want us to kind of talk about them, if that's cool. Okay. So the first one that I think is a structure that you need to have is a spirit of collaboration. And so for the three of you, what does it look like to embed a spirit of collaboration in your program? And how would you invite your staff into that collaboration process when you're creating a menu?
I'll start. This was something that was instilled with me before I was ever a beverage director. And it was at an establishment that changed their menu seasonally. So every 4 months we changed our menu, 3 or 4 months, sorry. And in doing so, it was an open format. And this wasn't just an open format for the people that were creating the cocktails, but this was something to allow the whole entire house to have a piece of the pie. So even down to our servers and anybody in the front of the house that wanted to submit an idea. So the breakdown is, we know as either owner operator or beverage manager, what our cost line is going to be, and then also some of the deals that we're getting specifically from our distributors and our reps, right? So if we know that we want to utilize a specific spirit based off a price point, then we put that on the list. Now, mind you, depending on if your house has 5 cocktails or 20 cocktails on that menu, from that point, you're prioritizing that we need a separation of different spirits, or different styles of cocktails across the board, whether that be stirred, whether that be shaken, whether that be dirty dumped, however you want to play that game. But then also each criteria and genre of spirit needs to show, because not everybody drinks one style of juice, right? So in that vein, we open the format to say, these are what the cocktails that we're looking for. These are the list of spirits and even some of the modifiers and cordials that we would like to incorporate. And at this point, this is kind of like the cost at the final product that we'd like to keep it at. And so everybody has their week or 2 week period where they're able to submit, and it's free range. Now, mind you, the beverage director and whoever else is in charge, the bartenders, they're probably doing the most of this, brunt of the work. But then it comes to a day where everybody gets to test and trial. And so it's literally prior to a complete shift. We come in, say 3 hours before, we bring any homemade ingredients and we start making things and tweaking them. And at that point, it's a sense of ownership and it's also a sense of pride, but there's no ego, because at the end of the day, if your beverage is on there or not, it's the best beverage that we could put out for the season. And at the end of the day, that's what the house is all about. One, it's, you know, satisfying the guest as well as making money. You know, can't forget that part. And so at that point, whether it's like your ingredient needs to just be manipulated a little bit, or it's just not balanced, and this is how we can go back to it, come to the drawing board, come back in 2 days with that, then you're able to assert that within the program. And then it's just kind of like the chopping block. We have one too many vodka cocktails. All right, can we switch this clear spirit to another clear spirit, right? And we'll, at that point, we figure out the balance there. So once again, that whole sense of ownership, and then also takes a lot of the work off of the individual who usually oversees the entirety of the beverage program. And at that point, that allows for your creativity to kind of stick to that one category, that one drink, knowing that, you know, all hands are on deck and it's not relying all on your back.
I have in the past done something similar, but I start by introducing myself to the kitchen, and also to Gary Regan always said, introduce yourself to everyone and make eye contact and say hello to everyone. So like dishwasher, busboy, doesn't matter if they work for you or with you, you know, make sure everyone gets seen. Because I think that's the first step to collaboration and the first step to service, good service. I would, because I had been working with people for a while, I could see their crutches, like this person's always making a margarita riff. It's always a margarita. It's just a different margarita. So I would take away their crutch and say, hey, this season, what I'd like you to do is work with this thing, this bottle that I've never seen you touch. I want you to take a look at it, taste it, work with it, submit a shaken and a stirred cocktail for the list. And if you want to do
and
more
turn it into a margarita, right?
Exactly. But if you want to submit more stuff that's not like that's not this thing, that's fine. But these are the two things I'm asking for from you. And then we'd set up like times when we would meet and we'd workshop the drinks together. And I also, when I workshop drinks of my own, I generally consult whoever is standing close to me. You know what I mean? Because my taste, the things that I like aren't necessarily what everybody else likes. And the drinks aren't all for me. You know, I'm not making them all for me. So I need other people to tell me if I'm headed in the right direction. So, I mean, that's kind of what I do. And I do think that a spirit of collaboration between the bar and the kitchen is if you have a kitchen in your bar, or a bar in your kitchen, whatever, if you're in a restaurant, like I think that working when those two things are working in concert, it enriches the relationship of everyone who works in the restaurant and the experience of everyone who goes into the restaurant.
I agree with that completely. I mean, I've been restaurant specific pretty much most of my career, and that collaboration with the kitchen is extremely important. We're in a very small restaurant right now, and so it's also involving that front of the house too, which, you know, he had spoken about also. It's like we had, it's loquat season here. And so one of our servers brought a shit ton of loquats from her backyard, in which both, you know, the chefs and I discussed what we can do to help each other make a syrup or this, that, and the other. That's very, very helpful. And so then she felt involved also. And so, of course, she's going to push that loquat cocktail that we come with or whatever. But it's also, as Phoebe said, it's like, I like to issue challenges like she does. It's like, you know, it's like, you've done nothing but margarita riffs. It's like, you know what? I think it's time for you to do a brown and stirred right now. You know, you haven't done a brown and stirred. You haven't done that. And this is including myself. I get stuck in ruts too. And also, if it doesn't make the menu necessarily, we usually test things out just running specials. And then they actually see, like on a night basis, that, oh my God, we sold a lot of the special tonight, or it didn't work. So I don't know. Tell me what feedback you were getting from the guests and stuff like that. And so then everybody feels involved, because The front of house is giving you the feedback from the guests so they feel like a part of it, because that's their money too, you know? They make money on that cocktail also. And they just feel more involved.
Yeah.
So, and I think it's definitely, I know you're more of the Virgo thing. I'm so Cancer, it's ridiculous. So I've been called, bar mom forever, and so it's like I have all my kids and I take care of them and I protect them like a mama bear. I'm sure we all do in our own different ways. But mine comes from a very not as analytical spot, but more from a feeling spot. I want to make sure that they feel like they are being heard and also being challenged, you know?
Yeah. And that perfectly brings me to my next point. So like the idea of embedding spirits like this into your program is, the end goal is less about the structure and more about generating safe spaces that are based in, safety and consent and communication, where people can feel free to show up as their fullest creative selves, right? Because all of us at some point in our career were given the freedom to be our fullest creative selves, and it has allowed us to become what we are today, right? And so everybody deserves that chance to kind of jump in feet first and to get excited about something. So the other two spirits, because everybody keeps crossing over into them, and so I'm just going to give them to you right now. So the other two spirits that I wanted to bring up were a spirit of feedback, right? How is your program and staff policies, how are they set up to receive, manage, and implement feedback within the team, and also to implement guest feedback, right? Which is super important, because if we keep running a cocktail that everybody keeps sending back, we're not doing a very good job, right? And also a spirit of innovation. So how do you support your staff in their continued learning? How do you stoke like a fire for learning and growth, like as a means of self-care for your staff? And I think this is something that, as budgets have gone down, this is something that we've had the opportunity as an industry to either get very creative about how we are providing education and how we're stoking the fires of innovation, or it's just gone out the window entirely, right? So if you all could speak to that, I would be interested to hear.
I have one thing I would do is, because I don't know if it's still happening or going to happen again, but the Bar Smarts program that was that started in the aughts. We attended after Christian and I went after we were already like running programs and stuff, but it's such a useful tool that one of the things I've done with my staff is say, hey guys, if you do this, if you finish this online course, I personally will take you to Bar Smarts Live. I will drive you in my car to the closest Bar Smarts Live. So like the last one that I did was Pittsburgh. So I drove the two people who finished the program, I drove them up to Pittsburgh. We spent 36 hours in Pittsburgh. But because like learning from the live is, I think, a valuable thing, but that's like a place to start. Also, like if I am ever working on a cocktail, I like to talk to the other bartenders, and I like to talk about, like, is this, I think this is balanced, but I mean, does it have a place? Does this have a place in our restaurant? I made a drink once that had a radish soda in it. Now, bear with me.
I'm in.
I'm in. Yeah.
Beautiful shade of pink. It was kind of the color of your hair, Kim. It looks like the way your hair looks on my computer.
Magnesium color.
But it was like bright. It was this beautiful pink color. It was clear. It had salt, like salt texture in it to make it pop and everything. It was a highball. I thought it was great. But the problem was when you lifted the glass to your face, how farty radishes smell when you like if you ever pickle a radish, or you know what I mean? You know what I mean? Yeah, like you bring it, that sulfur. That's
Yeah.
the whole thing. So like, you're like, oh, this looks amazing. And you pick it up and you bring the glass closer and closer and closer. And like from about here, like, you're like, you know, and I had to 86 the drink for obvious reasons, because yeah, it tasted good once you got your head there, but it was a hard time to like bring it up to your face.
Which it would be key to drinking
It
the
is indeed.
cocktail.
There are, you know, like they make long straws, but I don't know.
Yeah,
if they,
we could get, everybody gets one of those crazy straws.
One of
and
those
they
I
could
drink
hold
your
the glass.
milkshake straws.
yeah.
So-
Like,
I mean, I'm
go ahead.
sorry.
No, go
I
ahead.
value the notion that Kim discussed about challenges, you know, and as well as Chelsea. Within that, I just go back to some of my past experiences. I remember the first time I was ever getting interviewed for a bar manager position in Alexandria, Virginia, at this wonderful hotel bar called Jackson 20. And at the time, this individual was really trying to pull my card, who was interviewing me, and had asked me one specific question that has stuck with me the entirety of my life. And it is now something that I utilize to interview bar staff and individuals that are going to hold a criteria that of creation. And it was very specific. It was, what are the 2 least favorite things on your back bar? And, right.
Yeah.
And at the time, you know, 23-year-old Frank Mills was like Campari and Lafroig.
My, how the times have changed.
And I just thought it was a simplistic question. And right then and there, he kind of looked at me, he had the similar smile that you all did when I said that. And then he asked me right there on the spot to tell him how I would create something out of it anyway, right? And the one lucky backbone that I had is that I hate chocolate, and I was in the wine game prior to like the wine was my first true love. It was the first establishment that I actually like honed in on. And South African Pinotage tastes exactly like chocolate. I needed to understand that, so therefore I understood why other individuals would enjoy it. And so I kept that as kind of like a practicing tool and part of my own personal taxonomy of like the pyramid. Where from here, where do I go? Like, how many more options do I have at the next layer of the pyramid? And so I was able to utilize, you know, some backbone of like things that other people had taught me about Campari, some of the history I had done on like all Isla region spirits. And sorry, my very big dog is in the background moving around. But in doing so, luckily for myself, I was able to pull that out of my ASS. But now, ironically, I have a Boulevardier tattooed on my forearm. And my favorite neat pour of anything is cast strength peated scotch. So, you know, it kind of led to, you know, future fruition and foreshadowing. But within those challenges, you know, that's what I mean by like the pyramid. It's like you have to understand it regardless, because at the end of the day, some of your creativity is only going to come from the fact that you understand the spirit or you understand your program. And then from there, you can start doing the trickle effect that leads you to a finalized product.
I agree with you completely in what you said about, you know, not liking chocolate, but understanding, the pinotage and all that other kind of stuff that goes through education. And so for all of my staffs throughout the years, when I actually figured out what a Google Doc was, I made a library of all of my cocktail books and my wine books and all of that I give to everybody on staff. It's like, if you want to learn something, I will lend you the book. I have no problem with that at all, you know? So having that access, because also, you know, everybody's kind of broke. Also, it's like they can't afford to spend $40 on, you know, a Death and Company book or something like that. But I have one, I'm happy to lend it to you, you know? And then that they feel, you know, you're trusting them with a book. And so they feel trusted, and then they're learning, and then they can bring back what they got out of the book, which is possibly something that you didn't get out of it, you know? So I think it's nice to see that perspective at all. And no matter how many years I've been in this business, I love working with younger people or newer people rather, because they're learning something in a different way than I did. And you get stuck in your own ways and you're like, oh shit, I didn't know I could do it that way. Oh my God, that's genius. You know, like having a Muppet for your rimming a glass. It's genius. You know, well, I call it a Muppet. It's just a little wedge and a lime. And so it does this. So, and it's like, why I was wasting so much spirit and lines, which are like $8,000 right now, when I could just have that one little Muppet, and it also just makes me laugh when I see it in the little dish. So
I was picturing a literal Muppet.
I was too.
yeah,
I was
it
as
does
well,
look
so
like
thank
it.
you.
It really
you.
does.
Like,
Thank you for clarifying.
They make Muppets?
Yeah, so I'm like, all right, so how do I incorporate
We
that?
have a really weird bar.
I think we just started a Kickstarter, everybody,
Yeah,
for
yeah.
Yes.
Glass Muppets. I was when you started talking about how you're a Virgo and how you like your brain is system oriented. I was like, huh, I'm a shitty Virgo.
No.
Because, no, I was just thinking about it, but then I was thinking, no, I thought I brought myself back around. Don't just wait. Because like my main focus and the reason that I've developed any technique that I've ever developed or written any cocktail list the way I've written it or anything I've ever done in a beverage related way is in order to make sure that the people sitting in front of me are feeling seen, heard, and taken care of, and that the people standing beside me feel seen, understood, and heard. Those are the things. That's the certain for me, like that's the whole point of the whole exercise. And I do build systems, and I do actually have even a framework that I usually use that I was unconsciously using for a while, but that I use when I'm like writing a list. If I'm writing a list for a program, I have a way that I want that list to read always. So I was like, okay, first I thought I was a shitty Virgo, not a shitty Virgo, just a different Virgo. Also somewhat driven by my feelings, Kim.
Yeah, I mean, like, if hospitality is the idea of, generating that feeling of home, it starts with the people who are next to us, in the trenches. It's like, how do we make them feel comfortable and at home and like themselves? And I think that's one of the rare and beautiful things about this industry, that there's a possibility that we could have it if we put our mind to it, if we dedicate ourselves to it. There's not a lot of industries that is a possibility, right?
Right. So, and I've worked in some other ones where it's been like, like it's not examine who you are and make and show the best parts of you. It's tamp down who you are and put on this black blazer or whatever, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Please wear this ill-fitting vest. Frank, I'm sorry, I took up too much of your time, so I want you to dive on in.
Yeah.
We were steamrolling right perfectly, I feel like. My notion here is to give ideologies of conceptualizing a beverage program. And in essence, we talked about personal taxonomy and how it's a pyramid. So, I think that one of the biggest things is to always start with a theme. Right. You can do things across the board. It's just that some establishments already have themes built into them, and it can be as simple as formulating that from the name or the style of the establishment. It could also be depicted specifically by the owners and operators and what they want to see their establishment be known for. And so within that takes me into like it's going to take me into multiple directions as we speak on this really quick, but there is ways to utilize the whole house. And I think sustainability, as well as like, cost efficiency, and then, that cohesive nature that Phoebe had mentioned earlier between front of the house and back of the house, bar to kitchen, all comes into play in doing so. When stating, whether it be based off of the name or the style of the establishment, you walk into a tiki bar, you expect tiki cocktails, but at the end of the day, there may be a lot more underneath the surface than just, a name and what it's front presenting. And so at that times, you can then verse your style of cocktails. So basically, as I just mentioned, tiki, but then let's talk classics, let's talk traditional, let's talk molecular. You can even go further from that point and incorporate the back of the house or local seasonalities. Say farm to table. And so therefore, when you're utilizing the whole pie, you're utilizing some things that you would normally consider food when it's going into your beverages. And in that vein, that allows for you to say, do a few things in that aspect. You're tackling a problem of whether or not you have loss in the house, or if there's something that you can utilize that then allows there to be a cohesiveness, once again, from the front of the house to the back of the house. Seasonality, because at the end of the day, you can incorporate seasonal things that are just in abundance. So therefore, you don't have to worry about some day down the road or a couple weeks down the road that you can't obtain what you decided to utilize within your beverage program, and conceptualizing your drinks and what spirits you're going to use. The other is locally or regionally sourced. The easier to get it is because it's just closer, So if you do happen to have something that runs out, these are concepts that you're now starting to think about as you're really getting down to the bare bones of like what you want to do with your program, not exactly what's in your program. I think often, and so I had an establishment that it was the last establishment that I was truly the beverage director and hiring manager for. And so in that place, we were a surf and turf establishment in our own unique mid-Atlantic way. We were a fried chicken and oyster establishment. And so everybody, yeah, very unique, right?
You're right over.
So, everybody that was a part of the establishment grew up in what we call the DMV area, DC, Maryland, and Virginia. And so the Mid-Atlantic, we're known for, as well as where Chelsea's from, they have blue crabs in Maryland, Myself, being a DC, Maryland, Virginia man, I love overly brined oysters, and I'm a pescatarian. So the chicken side of it wasn't my thing, but the oyster side was, right? So in that vein of like, typically you have chicken and shrimp or lobster and steak. I took, when I was creating that beverage program, besides going off of classic cocktails and incorporating riffs, because I truly do believe that classic cocktails are the like starting point of anything. Like, there's very few new true cocktails, right? We're manipulating ingredients, we're infusing, we're subtracting or adding, we're changing build specs, we're incorporating some kind of like molecular change in a specific ingredient, whether it be in a spuma or puree, comparative to like what it would normally be if it was just in spirit derivative. We're taking a smoke element and using Lapsang Souchong tea instead of peated scotch, but we're still going back to the traditional notion of that cocktail, what it originated as. So from that point, I did want there to be a way that you can discern the separation of each cocktail. And so in doing that, fried chicken and oyster establishment, automatically you're thinking salinity and crisp, you're thinking sweet and savory, and you're thinking heat, or heat, spice, or salt, right? And so in that vein, I kind of made sure that no matter what hit your plate when it came to a food aspect, then a beverage was there for it to then kind of either balance it or amplify it. And so in doing that, flavor pairings are another thing that can spark your creativity when creating a beverage program. Because at the end of the day, you look at your menu, and once again, when it comes to like your menu changes seasonal, you probably are going to change your cocktail menu seasonal. It's kind of a whole house situation. At that point, you're seeing not only what is being produced out of the kitchen, but what ingredients they're using, right? And that is like one of the things that like I automatically just jump to. Also, because you know every ingredient in your house, you might just be trying to incorporate a lone ingredient across the board. That might be your uniqueness. I remember there was an establishment that was really where I understood craft, and I BS my way for the first couple of months because I did not want to get fired, and I just worked so hard in all the worst shifts so that they wouldn't. But it's because they always had no less than 12 cocktails on. They had 4 cocktails that they would change seasonally. They would have 4 cocktails that were based off of one specific ingredient every single month. So it would be a different fruit. It would be grape, strawberry, rhubarb, and they would have every cocktail be that. And then they had 4 house cocktails that they always had, right? So there was always a switch, but the switch was happening every single month. Remember that whole point of BSing until I made it. And so that was always unique. But then there was another thing that the chef did, and this is where I took some kind of creativity from that chef. Every protein that chef ever used, it made it 3 different ways. Whether he was taking a chicken and incorporating the breast, the lamb, or the breast, the leg, and the thigh, but then sauteing, sous vide, braising across the board, a different way, a different style every single time. So you still have so many, you take one thing and now you can manipulate it to become 20. And that's criteria of like utilizing personal taxonomy and seeing, you know, everything on the table and literally chopping that down to the last molecule to see if you can, you know, find something unique out of it. Within that, have rules within your builds. You know, streamline your process for creation as well as for your staff. That goes to how many steps you want within your builds, right? You know, is it something like where it's a bar that you want to build it off of showmanship, and so every single ingredient you see that's picked up? And do you have the time to do that? Or is it better because you can now streamline it by batching, and therefore you have a better control over consistency of product every single time it comes out. So therefore 100 people can make it, and 100 times it comes out the same exact way. That is a big deal at the end of the day, because then that leads to, all right, now, once again, how are you building those cocktails? Are you then incorporating them as a stirred cocktail? Are you shaking them? Are you straining them? Are you dumping them? And each one of those separateness then brings you back to the very first thing that you thought about, because now you want to show face across the board, so people have different styles and different ways to enjoy themselves while they sit at your bar and incorporate themselves into your beverage program. But you may have an ingredient that you thought was better situated stirred, but then you realize, if I made this as a puree because there is leftover pumpkin, or we hollow out pumpkin in the kitchen for like as a way of presenting a dish, well, what happens to all of that puree? Now I can utilize that, and maybe I was just going to use like a syrup that would taste like pumpkin, but now I actually utilize a puree. Well, you can't stir that puree, that's for sure. So now you go back to the drawing board on how you're going to utilize that as a shaken cocktail. And yes.
I just wanted to get, I think you're dovetailing really well into what Kim was going to talk about.
Yeah, for sure. And this is my last, and this is just truly my last part right here, is like between that and just now you've gone step and widening out. Glassware garnish presentation, right? And so glassware garnish presentation, your presentation then leads to what you can name your cocktail. And naming is a part of, you know, creation. And that's one part for me that has always been easy. Everything else is hard, but the second I have ingredients, this pattern brain all of a sudden just shoots out something. And that can be from music, it can be from movies, it can be from something in pop culture, famous people, word association when it comes to an ingredient, and then deriving from the original cocktail that you were trying to create a riff off of to begin with. Bang, I'm done.
Actually, for me, creating the names is the hardest part for me. Like if I'm going out and I'm like, oh, that's a great name for a cocktail, and I have literally a notebook and my phone that I added. And then the next time I'm like, what in the hell was I talking about? What does the white sands of Slidell mean? You know, it's a,
I
okay,
have so
all right.
many of those.
I have
Yeah.
no idea. So that's a great way to get your staff involved also, get them in on the names also. But on that, like he was speaking to, you know, finding that inspiration from music or this, one of the biggest things, and something I'm continually trying to work on, because we get so tired and we get so burnt. And because this is exhausting work. It's physically exhausting, it's mentally exhausting. We're running numbers in our heads. We've got reps that aren't showing up. We have, you know, deliveries that aren't showing up. All that kind of stuff. You know, by the time we actually have a day off, we're like, you know what, I'm staying at home. I'm going to sit there and watch regrettable television. You know, I just don't want to think anymore. But I found that it's really important, and this also goes along with self-care, to take yourself out on a date. And really yourself, just one person, you know, whether that's going to a bar or restaurant, which is usually my last go-to, because the last thing I want to do is go into a restaurant. But sometimes I'm like, yeah, let's see what they're up to. And then you pick up a different technique or whatever. But going to a museum or going to a show or something like that, and doing that by yourself, I think is really almost like meditation, which it just like gives you space, and you don't know where that's going to come into play. It's like, you know, you might be in a gallery and you're like, see a Dutch painting, and it's like, oh, you know what? I haven't worked with persimmons in a while. You know, or, you know, you never really know, but having that time for yourself and doing something that fills you, I think is really, really important, and helps that creative space. And also, it's not, I'm just thinking cocktails, I'm just thinking cocktails. It's something for you, it's something you enjoy, and that gives you the space to kind of filter the junk out and fill it with something that's beautiful.
Yeah.
And
I call that scratching your brain.
yeah, yeah, it really is.
Yeah, it's like
Right, it's challenging it in a different way, you know. So it's like trying to learn how to do something with your left hand, you know.
I
Like,
value that so
when
much.
you first learned how to double stir, it's like you had to learn how to do it with your left hand first.
Mhm.
You're not used to doing that, you know. So
Right.
it's stretching that, and then all of a sudden you're more efficient because you can do two at once.
Right.
So I think that that's a very important thing to give to yourself, and also to suggest that to other people. It's like, oh, I saw this great exhibit, maybe you should go, you know. Or that's not their thing, they might just go to a punk show and they find something, you know.
Well,
or-
and like during like lockdown, remember lockdown?
oh yeah, that was fun.
When we couldn't go anywhere or do
Exactly.
anything, I discovered the real, true, and innate value of headphones during that time.
Yeah.
Because when you're locked in your house with your partner, it doesn't matter how much you love them or how close you are, or that you're best friends or whatever. There comes a time when everyone needs to go to their respective corner. And
Yep.
if that corner is in the same corner that you're in, those headphones are invaluable
Very
to,
true.
like, you know, like either it's music or books or whatever, like just to like take yourself out of your situation. I mean, I gave myself space that way anyway. Or I would get in my car and drive to nowhere, just to drive, because you couldn't go anywhere. So I just drive. But I live in the mountains, so it's not that bad. But I love the idea that Frank was saying about when you were talking about tiki drinks and how you were reimagining, you know, how you're thinking like about using different gastronomical or maybe molecular techniques or whatever. One of the things that we have done in the past to challenge ourselves and I call them thought problems, is to tell, like, sometimes I'm like, you know, I want to make a cocktail that tastes like baklava, but I want it to be a cocktail, right? So how am I going to do that? I've decided that that's one of the flavors I want to utilize. Or like at one point we were messing around. We were like, I think it's great to stand presentation on its head. You know, like I want to make a stirred variation on a suffering bastard and serve it down. So neat in a rocks glass with no ice and a lime twist, you know, like to play around with like the structure of what we all know, because you're right, Frank, everything like the classic cocktails and the canon of classic cocktails is the framework that we hang all of our work on, right? So like if you think of what we do as a painting, if you carry the art gallery analogy to the point where you're like, this is my artwork, like all painters are working out of a tradition of painting, you know, like there's a long tradition of painting and both the craftsmanship and the art of painting, the craftsmanship and the art of cocktail design, and creativity in that sphere is also, it's not as long as maybe the painting, but you know, actually it's pretty long, because once people figured out that fruit was rotten and that got them drunk, they started to mess with it. You know what I mean? And they started putting things into it to make it taste better so that they could actually get it down their throats, you know, like, so it's a long history that we have, and to pretend like we're reinventing the wheel would be, you know, defeating ourselves.
You just hit it on the head though. Like the last portion of this, right, is stop looking at it as an individuality that you need to then just create. You just said people. Create by community is also very valuable. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I mentioned was like going and sit in front of somebody and allow them to really kind of help you get to that point, or ask other people where they got their, you know, creativity from, because it might spark something inside of you. The whole notion of art, I love art. I go to art galleries, I go by myself and I stand at one painting. I'm that guy, 30 minutes looking. You know what I'm looking for? The very first stroke, that very first layer of a median, because then with the way my brain works, then I can work my way back out of it. And then when I can see how they got from brushstroke to next and where they got their outline from, obviously they had a criteria to start, or they had something in mind on how they wanted to finish it. It may have changed or manipulated itself when they finalized it, but at the end of the day, there was something that sparked them. And at that point, maybe that helps me.
And I think
first stroke is a good cocktail name.
Yeah.
I think we have to wrap it up. I have this quote that we used before that I just wanted to share that I think is kind of a good wrap up of everything we've been talking about. It's by a woman who was actually, there was a time when people paid a lot of attention to handwriting. And this woman was a calligrapher, a very famous calligrapher at the time. Her name was Hella Basu. And the quote is, in all object making, I'm applying this also to beverages, in all object making, the aspect that relates to its conceptual interpretation is art. That which relates the object to an intended purpose is design, and the quality of its execution is craft.
Ooh.
And I really think that, I mean, when I read it for the first time, that really encapsulated sort of my take on what we do. And I felt it was important to kind of include it in our talk, if only as the capstone to the discussion.
I think it's the perfect capstone.
Really
I'm looking forward to seeing you guys in
It's
New
all
Orleans
good.
in a couple months.
Somebody drop the gavel. That's it. Y'all are great. This was
Friends,
fun.
it's an absolute pleasure to once again sit amongst all of y'all and have this discussion that will be outward to others to enjoy.
Yeah,
I enjoy it myself.
And we'll reconvene in New Orleans, and you know,
woohoo!
Good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Take
Thank
care,
you,
guys.
Tales of the Cocktail Organization.
Thank you, Tales.
Yeah. Thanks, Tales.